What is up, everybody, and welcome to another Webinar Wednesday. So it's Brian and Randy here from the Simple team, and basically what we're going to do today is just kind of go through and do a little recap of last week's virtual meetup, where we basically went through and just kind of talked about all the various types of deals that you can do and that we have done when wholesaling. So I know a lot of wholesalers, you kind of think about wholesaling a property, you think of that typical single family property that you can basically just sell to a buyer that wants to have a rental property or maybe even flip it and stuff like that. But there are a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different types of opportunities, lots of types of properties that you can wholesale. So we kind of ran through that last week, and we're going to kind of recap some of that stuff, and then also go over some questions that were asked throughout this past week and stuff. So before we get into that, though, Randy, so one of the big questions, I think I got 3 people just asked us that because we had a lot of people on last week's meetup and a lot of new people too that don't necessarily know us. But one of the big questions that we got was, why do we double close on everything? So that's our strategy that we're doing. And we are a little different than a typical wholesaler. We do wholesale some properties, but we also do some quick double closings. We also do some wholetailing, where we're something we like to call the simple close, where we buy properties and hold it for a little while, then market it after we buy it. So that's what we do with a lot of our stuff. But typical kind of double closing. So a lot of people were kind of asking why we handle it that way. And I was just telling them the big thing with us is we have control of the property. So that's the kind of the big reason of why we want to do things like that. We want to make sure that we control the property. We want to be able to market it how we want to. We are a brokerage as well, so we do list it that way. And also we have a lot of private money lenders that we're able to give those private money lenders kind of opportunity to earn some money from us with interest, whether it's secured money or unsecured money, those types of things. So we do wholesale, we do some double closings, and we do the wholetailing thing as well. And it's just kind of whatever you are comfortable with. So if you are out there, if you're just starting out wholesaling, I think just assigning your contract is the best way to go. Until you get your feet wet, so you understand a little bit more. If you have some money, especially if you're able to use your own money, double closing is a great way to go. Just because you're able to kind of control things a little bit more, things like that. So this is kind of a whole other webinar that we can do, multifaceted thing that we can kind of get into a little bit later. But I did want to just kind of address that a little bit, as I know we did have some people asking that question. So, but Rainey, let me throw that over to you real quick. Just when you're talking to people about the advantage of assigning versus double closing and things like that, what's some advice that you have for people that are kind of going back and forth on what to do with that?
Yeah, so you kind of hit some of the key points there. Like if you're just starting out, taking properties down probably isn't ideal because it does take a lot of cash on hand. Then you have holding costs as well, the longer you hold that property. So assigning the deals straight from the gun is obviously the most popular way. And that's how usually everyone gets started. So we like to take the deals down, especially on my side, like the dispo side of things. We have all the control of the property. It's vacant. We know we have clear title. So I know a lot of times when people are assigning deals, things will pop up and could potentially kill the deal before you even get to the closing table. So we don't have to worry about that. Property's cleaned out, has a lockbox on, so anyone can literally go at any time and take their contractor through and get all their due diligence before they even get a purchase agreement signed. So our time from purchase agreement signed to closing is typically 7 to 10 days. Whereas if they needed that extra due diligence time, it could be 2 to 3 weeks. So that helps there. But, if you take properties down, you also can sell it multiple different ways. So we sell maybe a third of our inventory a year on seller financing. And that's just another way where you can maybe not get your money up front, but over time, collect interest like a mortgage company would, and it's another investment strategy for yourself. So different exit strategies by taking the deals down, and just the flexibility, and it's the key for me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's definitely true. And that's why we do that. That's kind of, and honestly, I hate this reason in business of like, why do you do things like, oh, it's just the way we've always done it. That is kind of the case here, but it's what Brett has he built a business doing it this way. And that's kind of what we've always done. Like I said, when we have certain properties, we do assign contracts. We do some quick double closings. So we do it that way as well. But this is kind of our main strategy of kind of what we like to do.
It's kind of, we're kind of known for that now too. Like sometimes if I get properties and I'll send them to buyers like, hey, I have to assign this deal or do a double close. It's not going to be cleaned out. They're like, oh, whoa, what's going on? So now they expect us to have ownership of these houses and the
Yeah.
property be all pretty and have all these videos ready. So it's kind of the reputation we've built.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, yeah, and we kind of worked our way up to that. Like back from,
Yeah.
3 years ago, we weren't doing things that way and stuff. So we kind of worked up to that. But if you are kind of on that fence, kind of deciding like, hey, what do you want? What do I want to do? Do I want to use, do I want to sign the contract or do I want to double close? Kind of the issue or the question that people are asking when you're starting off. Typical rule of thumb, what I kind of like to do is just say, if if your assignment fee is less than $10,000, go ahead and just assign it. If it's more than $10,000, think about how you can do a double close. That's kind of just a general thing, and you can kind of go by. For the most part, if you're working with somebody like I never really pay attention to like what the assignment fee is. If it's I want to get the property for the price that I want to, and that's all I really care about. So if I'm paying a good assignment fee, I'll be like, hey man, good job. Like, can you teach me some negotiation tactics? Like, that's awesome. You got under contract for that low or whatever. So that's good stuff. So that's just something that I wanted to kind of point out. But that we can do a whole other episode on kind of all the different aspects and all the different strategies and stuff. But so let's get into kind of a little of what we talked about last week. So we kind of got into just the different types of properties, different types of opportunities that we were able to wholesale over the last, basically the last few months. So it's not your typical like, single family residence or, duplex even and stuff like that. These are all kind of the opposite or kind of the other scenarios that we run into. So we talked a little bit about it, like a vacant cookie cutter house, an occupied property, a condo, land, a multifamily, a subject to deal, an escrow agreement, a deal that has an escrow agreement in place, and then also working with other wholesalers to go ahead and help them out with their deal. So Randy, let's start there with that, because that's something that you deal with a lot every day of, working with other wholesalers, and we'll have even people that maybe they have an extensive buyers list or they're growing their buyers list and maybe they don't have a deal currently, and they come to you and say, hey, like, is there any way that I can work with you to, wholesale one of your deals or help sell one of your deals? So basically, let's kind of have you start with that of when you are working with another wholesaler, and we're not talking about daisy chaining. We're not talking about just taking something off of our website or, hey, Randy sends out an email and then I'm going to send it to my buyers list later on that day, because that's usually going to happen. And that's not what we're talking about. That's not the right way to do this. So this is when somebody comes to you and they say, hey, I want to work with another wholesaler that maybe has more inventory than I have, but I have a buyer that's hungry right now that's looking for this. Like, I think they might be interested in this property. What's the best way to kind of go about that?
Yeah. So the best way is make sure that, they've seen the property. So, the thing you don't want to do is take our property, raise the price on it, because we post our stuff everywhere. And most investors, I mean, they'll at least Google that address, and it's either going to pop up, that property's going to pop up on our website, it's going to pop up on Zillow, and it's gonna be somewhere. So if they see that you raise the price on our property, it's immediately gonna be a red flag. So the thing to do is just approach me and say, hey, I've got this buyer looking on the east side. Can I show him some of your properties, or can I get that property under contract with you and just then assign it to my buyer? Those two ways are the best ways to do it. And I kind of get a little tighter nowadays. Like, if you're going to come to me and do that, I'm probably going to have to ask you to probably close that within 7 to 10 days. So it's really important, just have your buyer ready to go on something that that they're going to want. And then they can either just connect them straightly to us and get a referral fee, or get it under contract with us, and then they can assign it like a normal wholesale deal. But yeah, just not coming in and just trying to get a list of our properties and kind of emailing out to their buyers list and see what happens. That's not going to work. I made that mistake in the past, and those wholesalers never closed the deal. So
you made that mistake by trying to work with another wholesaler that way, not you doing that.
Basically, they got a hold of me and put the property under contract, and then maybe 30 minutes later, I see it in an email getting blasted out, and I was like, no. So we killed that deal. And I've given people a chance, and then the people that have come to me did it exactly the right way. They knew they had a buyer for that property because they already did the diligence on it, put it under contract with me for whatever price, and then just assigned it to their buyer. And those usually always close for the most part. So that's the right way to do it.
Yeah. What do you say to this? Because we do list a lot of our properties as well. So what do we say? What do you say to a wholesaler? And I didn't prepare you for this. So I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. So we'll see how you answer this. But what do you say to a wholesaler that says, "Hey, I want to get this property under contract with you. I have a buyer for it," but then they're basically like, "But I need you to take it off the market."
I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So usually when someone says that to me, I'm hearing take it off the market because I don't want them to find out how much I'm buying this for, but also it to me that sounds like they're still going to try and shop it around. Yeah. So I'm like, I can't take it off the market for you. I can definitely put it under contract and we can close in 7 to 10 days. But yeah, I mean, that's something else I've done in the past, and that never worked.
Yeah, these are all things that when you
like, I really need this taken off the market, and it shouldn't be a big deal unless their plan was just to shop it around.
Yeah. So I mean, these are all conversations that if you're doing it legit, if you're ready for things, these are all things that you need to be ready for. Maybe even your buyers asking the questions or the sellers asking questions, around that, or even just like for proof of funds is a big one too, where people ask for proof of funds. And I see. I know wholesalers when I was in your, when I was in your position before you took it over, and people would, I knew it was a wholesaler, and I just asked for proof of funds to be able that they could purchase the property. And some people would get upset with me about that. And like, you don't have proof of funds, I'm not going to take you legit. I'm not going to that's something that you need. So if you are wholesaling, you got to be able to kind of handle that as well. Cause I know a lot of sellers, even direct to seller, are educated really well right now where they know to ask, hey, I need to ask for proof of funds. I need to make sure this person is able to buy my property. So make sure you have a plan for that. It just makes you a lot more legit, a lot more professional. So,
yeah, and just piggybacking on that professional statement. I mean, I think the big thing when someone calls me and they're a wholesaler, they want to, and that's fine. Like, I don't have anything against other people trying to wholesale our property as long as it all works out. Yeah. But when people call me and I know some people are trained to acquire properties like this, but they say that they're an investor and they're a cash buyer. And I know all the wholesale scripts. I know when I'm getting called by a wholesaler. I mean, it's I've been there, done that. So I know when someone calls me what they're saying, I'm like, okay, and I'll say, are you a wholesaler or are you an actual cash buyer? And they'll, well, sometimes I close, sometimes I don't, depending on the deal. I'm like, just be honest with me, because I'm as transparent as possible. So I just ask that in return, and they eventually say, yeah, I am a wholesaler. And then that conversation can finally go on the track that it's supposed to go. Or if we're going the other track, it's just setting everyone up for, a bad deal. So I just encourage wholesalers, if you're trying to either talk to me or someone else about wholesaling their property as well, just be straightforward with them. Say, hey, I'm also a wholesaler in the area. I have a pretty good buyers list. I think this property is a really good fit for them, and take it from there. Don't try to structure it like you're talking to a distressed seller where you're trying to get that deal. It's a completely different conversation. And yeah, I just want to make sure that I made a point of that. So
yeah, I mean, it's because that's what you said. Like, we're completely transparent about that stuff. Like, I tell people, like, hey, if you're trying to wholesale this, like, it's not gonna work. Like, there's not enough meat on the bone for you. Yeah. Or I mean, like, if you're gonna try to do this, you need to sell it for my price, and I can maybe give you, I can give you a margin out of that or something like that. But so anyway, let's no, that's great information. So I really appreciate that. Let's move on to one of the other questions. A lot of the questions that we got that came in like this week about all the different properties that we talked about last week. A lot of questions about wholesaling properties with tenants in them and with leases in place, or even tenants with them without leases in place, because that's a whole thing as well. So let's dive into that a little bit of just how to work a deal when you have basically a tenant in place, whether that tenant is paying, not paying, has a lease, doesn't have a lease, whatever it may be, kind of just the right strategy, the right way to go about that. So let's hit up first of that tenant that basically just, somebody needs to sell their property, that they just, they're selling off their portfolio. They just want to get out of the game a little bit. So they have a tenant in place, they have a lease in place, the tenant's paying, and they just want to get out from underneath it. So when we're talking about deals like that, the best thing to do is make sure that I think as a wholesaler, best thing to do is just be, ask that sellers, like, hey, is there, am I able to talk to the tenant? Am I able to get in to see the property, get pictures and things like that? And then just talk to the tenant. If you can build rapport as much with the tenant as you can with the seller, that goes a long
Yeah.
way, because once you get to know that person, once you understand what's going on, then it just makes it a lot easier on that selling side when you're, when you're talking to your buyers and basically being like, yeah, I've talked to the tenant before. I know John, he's a great, seems like a really good guy. He likes the Chicago Bears or whatever the situation may be. When you're able to give that information to your buyer, that goes a long way. Then it also just helps the transition out, because your number one thing as a wholesaler too, remember, you are part of that transition. You're not just dealing with the contracts and passing it off. If you want to build this into a business, you want to build your reputation up, you want to be that person that's in the middle to help that transition. And part of that can be to hand off that tenant to that new buyer too. And you're telling that tenant like, hey, I want to make sure that I get the right buyer for you, the person that's going to, take care of you in this property, that wants to keep you in here, whatever the situation may be. And then when you can, do that introduction and hand it off, it makes it so much easier for your buyer. And that goes a long way when you're able to, they say, hey, here's a tenant. His name is John. He's a good guy. I gave him your information. He's going to be reaching out to you. He just wants to make sure he's safe and that he's able to stay in this property, or he wants to know what's going on with his lease. Like, that stuff just goes a long way. So when you're having those conversations with buyers, Randy, and when you don't have that information about the tenant, or you do, like, how much of an issue can that be, and how much do wholesalers need to really pay attention to, like, how important that is to have that be that connector in the middle too.
Yeah, if you don't have any information about the tenant, any paperwork or contact info, your chances of selling that are probably pretty slim, because just like any other property, most investors, especially if it's tenanted, they want to go in there and see what the condition of the property is, because who knows what tenants can do, right? And even if they're paying, they're going to want to see the copy of that lease to see the terms of it. If they can, if they acquire the property, are they going to have to wait a year for that lease to expire, or can that tenant, in 60 days move out, whatever that arrangement may be. So obviously, the more information, the better. If you don't have any, I don't. It's not a good deal to sell, in my opinion. But yeah, being the connector, showing that property makes, if you've got access to that property or an agreed upon time with that tenant, like, hey, is it cool if I bring some people by on Tuesdays or Thursdays? That goes a long way as well, so you can get multiple people in at once. But then also, it's going to be you're taking time out of someone's day when showing an occupied property. So you only want to take some serious buyers there. So proof of funds is huge on the front end, and how quick that buyer can close. You want to get all the information too.
Yeah, and just a little tip too, when you're working with a tenant and being able to get somebody into a property, or even if you're dealing with a seller and having to get people into that property to show it and things, like an Amazon gift card or a Kroger gift card, like, that goes a long way. So keep that in mind. If somebody's helping you out and they're basically cooperating with you on stuff, like, feel free to drop them a gift card just as a thank you. Even a thank you note goes a long way. And I know it's a lot of people don't do that anymore. But so just keep that in mind as well. So the opposite end of that is when you have an occupied property that, hey, there's no lease, the tenant's not paying, they probably need evicted. Those are those situations too, and that's always it's a tougher property to sell. But this is when it comes into you being able to, it is sellable. You just need to make sure you get it at the right price. So when you are going through that negotiation, when you're talking, when you're doing all that stuff, these are all the things that you are bringing up of, hey, I understand that they don't have a lease, and that's okay. I can still work with you, but I'm going to need to take a little bit off here, or they're not paying. Like, I'm going to need to go through an eviction, or my buyer's going to need to go through an eviction. So that's that's $1,500 off the price of this property, or if it's going to be another 2 months they're not paying rent, we're going to have to figure that into the price. So those are all things that just need to be negotiated, need to be talked through. So just keep that in mind, because it is a tougher thing to sell. When you're looking at Randy's standpoint, Randy handles all of our sales. He's our dispo guy. If we give him two properties that are occupied, and one of them has a lease, one of them has a rent roll, one of them has tenant contact information, it's just way easier to sell than that property that's not. So that property that's not is easy to sell. You got to make sure you get it at the right price, so then somebody can basically take on that headache. And that's what we do a lot of times is we'll take those things on, because I'm okay buying that property and kind of taking care of that headache. And kind of working out that situation. So just keep that in mind. And if you are in a situation where maybe that's a time too, maybe you can't find a buyer, maybe you can't wholesale it right away, maybe you can find somebody that you can team up with that will buy it, that will stabilize it with you and kind of help you out, and then JV on it with them or partner on it with them. There's a lot of people I know, us included, or just people, no matter what city you're in, there's a lot of people that will work with that with you. So it'd be a good thing to do. So Randy, do you have any other things on just the occupied properties or any other tips when you're dealing with it?
Yeah, just wrapping up the ones with the bad tenants or like evictions needed. It's all about the price at that point. It's gonna have to be at a good enough discount for someone to take on the headache. So it's not, you just don't pick up those properties at the same price you would with a good tenant versus a bad tenant. So it's just, you gotta get more of a discount to sell those.
Yep. So, and then one of the other questions that we had was, there was a lot of questions that came in about, so wholesaling a property with an escrow agreement in place. So this is a very unique situation. This is something that we do often, and it helps us out a lot. Granted, since we're going to do the double close and we can buy that property, we're using our money to buy it. It does help us out. It puts us in a good position. But like I said, if you are in this position, you can also partner with somebody or work with somebody. You can't necessarily make this work. So what we're really talking about here is when an escrow agreement is in place, is the situation is if we get a property under contract and we're going to buy that property, or we're going to wholesale that property to somebody that's going to buy that property, but the seller maybe needs to close on the property first. They need to sell the property first, but they need to stay in it for another 2 weeks or another month because they need the money now, but they won't be able to get into their apartment, or they won't be able to move until 2 weeks or a month down the road. So that's this type of situation. So what we do in that case is we just put an escrow agreement in place through the title company. It basically says, hey, we're going to buy this we're buying this property next week for $50,000, but we're going to hold back $5,000 in escrow for a month, and then they're going to move out a month from now. So basically what'll happen is we close on that property, they buy, or they have that $45,000 they get to take with them, and then there's a $5,000 that's held with the title company. Basically, so when that person moves out in a month or a little less, once they move out, we verify they moved out, then we just notify the title company and they get their $5,000. So then we've also done a couple of deals where we were able to do that and then actually able to still sell the property or assign that contract to the end buyer with that escrow agreement in place.
Yeah.
And that is possible. I actually talked to one of our favorite buyers. He's actually going through that now with one of our favorite wholesalers that I work with here in Indianapolis, where she got a property under contract. There's an escrow agreement in place because we worked with her all the time and kind of helped her out with that a little bit. And then this buyer, he's like, I don't know, am I able to do this? Am I able to take this on? Yeah, you can definitely wholesale that contract. It's just the same thing. But now that end buyer is kind of responsible if they don't get out, or if something else happens, that he's going to have to deal with an eviction or, small claims court, or dealing with a title company or anything like that. So there's a little bit more, moving parts with that, but it's all possible to do too.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're a wholesaler and you're kind of working with that too, you're going to kind of put some, hopefully you kind of put faith into that buyer too. Like, hey, if something does pop up, like I'm more than happy to help you out. Or, if I need to swing by there, drop off notices, or talk to the tenant, talk to the homeowner, whatever it is, I'm more than happy to help out with that. So there's some stuff that's going on with that. But Randy, you have any info on just kind of with that, when you're working with, when you're on that end game of talking to those buyers and kind of making sure they understand kind of what that escrow agreement is and how it's in place and what that really does with that?
Yeah, well, from the dispo side, I'm not a fan of it. For us, I think there's things I have to wait to sell it, but I can start marketing it, with the information that I have. But yeah, just keeping it transparent and saying, hey, this is kind of what's going on. We own the property, but the previous owner is going to be in there for 2 more weeks.
Yeah.
Kind of on this topic, like when I started wholesaling, I actually did a deal once where property was in very, very rough shape, but the seller was still living there. And she didn't have any place to go after closing, but I had a buyer ready to roll on this. So we just set up like a seller lease back at closing. So we closed in 14 days as we agreed, but that seller then signed a lease at closing to the new buyer saying she was going to pay like $550 per month for 2 months. So she could find a place to go after that. So that's, kind of the same thing, but a little different, but that's something you can also do, and you can still assign deals that way. Mm-hmm. And that as long as the new buyer is getting something in return, I think, that always works. Yeah.
Which actually we just closed on a property earlier this year, and closed on a property in February. And that's what we did. We had a 3-month lease.
Yep.
with the people after that and stuff. So that's always possible. And I really just wanted to, I know we had a couple questions about that, so I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit today, but really what the whole point of that was and the whole point of what we talked about on last week's meetup. If you haven't seen it yet, definitely go on our YouTube page, on our Facebook page, and listen to the meetup from last week. But really what it is all about of understanding that no matter what the situation is, a big part of being a wholesaler is problem solving. So no matter what the situation is, no matter what it's, if it's a money situation, a house situation, tenant situation, person situation, any of those things, it's able to be solved in some way. It's just, you got to figure out what that is. What do they really need? What do they really want? Sometimes people just need the money right now, and then they need to, they need to find that place, or they need 2 weeks in between there. So it's just like, hey, we can do this and we can figure that out, but here's what we need in place too. We need to hold back some money or whatever it may be. So no matter what it is, whether it's a condo, one of the things we've pointed out about that, if you're wholesaling a condo, make sure it can be a rental property. If you're going to market it as a rental property, we ran into that issue. When you're dealing with the land, it's kind of a different conversation. So making sure you understand what people want for. Is your buyer looking for timber? Are they looking for buildable land? What do they need? So those types of things. When you're working with a subject to deal, make sure that your seller understands, hey, you're not going to be able to get another mortgage because this mortgage is still in your name. So those types of things. So if you have any other questions about any of this stuff, we would love to help you out. Love to answer any of. We need to jump on here, do another webinar about it next week. We can. Like I said, a lot of stuff was covered in last week's meetup. Or let us know if you have any information on what we can do for another webinar or a tip for Tuesday, anything like that. But Randy, with that, man, I think we're about out of time. So do you have any last just words of wisdom for us when it comes to just working with different types of properties that you can wholesale?
Just keep asking questions. If you ever feel like you're in a situation where, hey, I don't think I can do this deal. I mean, real estate's really, really creative in all ways, and there's usually some sort of solution. So I just encourage everyone to keep asking questions. I love doing these kind of webinars where it's just kind of Q&A because, there's endless amounts of questions, and we try to give you the best answers as possible. But I just think when people just ask the questions, they'll get their clear answer and kind of help them move in the right direction.
Yeah. 100%. It's kind of funny. I love it when this happens, and this happens all the time. So we just had a new team member come on the team last week, and this conversation happened with them. The team member before that came on with us. This happened with them. Working with other wholesalers, this conversation happens with them all the time, and that conversation goes a little something like, "Are we able to blah blah blah, whatever it is, ... Are we able to do this? Are we able to do that?" The answer is like, anything is possible. Anything is possible. Not every deal is a wholesale deal, but if it is, anything is possible. You can make a lot of things work. Sometimes it's just like, hey, we need to, this is more of a retail lead or whatever it may be. So not every deal is a wholesale deal, but if it falls in that category, if I think it is, anything is possible. We can make anything happen. And that's kind of the example, the examples that we wanted to show of all these different deals that we were able to do, that we were wholesaling and stuff like that. So with that, I want to thank you so much, Randy, for joining me today, and just all the tips that you had, and everybody out there too. Thank you for our audience, and we will talk to you guys later. We'll see you next week on another webinar Wednesday. Let us know if there's anything we can do to help you out. With that, take care.